The prairie quiet settled heavy that morning, the kind that comes before the wind shifts. Caleb Mercer rode the fence line checking water access, leather creaking with each step his mare took. The brass survey marker caught the sunrise where his land met the creek, territorial seal stamped clear. Then he heard it, a cry, faint as a wounded bird. He found her collapsed near the marker, dress torn and mud-caked, blood darkening the sand beneath her. She looked up, eyes wide with pain and something worse than fear. "Please," she whispered. "It hurts, down there too. Please don't look." He knelt beside her, hands steady as he'd learned in another life. "You're safe now. Let me see." He pulled back the torn fabric to check the wound, and froze. The gash was deep, infected, but beneath it, burned into her skin, a circular brand mark, fresh. The initials clear, VG. He knew that mark, and he knew what it meant she'd run from. Caleb wrapped his coat around her shoulders, careful not to press against the wound. She flinched anyway, biting back a cry. "Can you tell me your name?" "Nora." Her voice came thin, threaded with fever. "I've been walking 2 days, maybe 3. I lost count." He lifted her as gently as he could manage, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She weighed almost nothing. Hunger and fear had worn her down to bone and will. Every step jarred the wound, and he felt her bite back screams against his shoulder, her breath hot and rapid against his neck. The mare followed without needing guidance, reins trailing. Caleb had walked this mile 1,000 times, to the creek at dawn, back to the cabin before full light, but never carrying a branded woman who'd rather die in the desert than return to whatever hell had marked her. The cabin door stood open. He'd left it that way, expecting to be back before the coffee went cold. Now he kicked it wider, carried her straight to the rope bed near the stove, and laid her down as carefully as he'd lift a newborn calf. She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "If they find me here, they'll take your land too." He stared at her. "What?" But her eyes had already closed, fever pulling her under. Caleb built up the fire and set water to boil. The smell of burning mesquite filled the small space, mixing with the alkali dust that clung to everything out here. He found clean cloth, torn from an old shirt Sarah had made him back when there was a Sarah, and soaked it in the heated water. When he pulled back the torn dress to clean the wound properly, he had to stop himself from cursing. The gash ran deep along her inner thigh, edges angry and seeping. Infection had already started its work, but it was the brand that made his hands shake. VG, with a date beneath, June 1878, 2 months ago. Fresh enough that the tissue was still raised, still red around the edges where the iron had burned deepest. Vernon Grissom's mark, the same ornate initials that appeared on every deed, every survey map, every foreclosure notice that came out of the Territorial Land Office. Caleb had seen Grissom's signature a dozen times. He'd never seen it burned into human flesh. He cleaned the wound with steady hands, the way Doc Pritchard had taught him years back when Sarah was still alive and the ranch had a future. The water ran pink, then red, then pink again. Nora whimpered in her fever sleep, but didn't wake. He bandaged the wound with strips of clean cloth, wrapping it tight enough to hold but loose enough to let it breathe. Then he covered her with the quilt his mother had made, the only soft thing left in the house. The coffee had gone cold. He drank it anyway, standing at the window, watching the sun climb higher. His land stretched out before him, 80 acres of stubborn grass and stubborn hope. His father had claimed it in '69, paid the survey fees and horseshoes and labor, built the cabin with his own hands. When he died, the land passed to Caleb with nothing but a handshake and a brass compass that always pointed true. No deed on file, no paper in the land office vault, just a son's promise to hold what his father had held. Caleb looked at the woman sleeping in his bed, branded with the initials of the man who controlled every property transfer in the territory. She'd said they'll take your land too, like she knew something he didn't, like she'd seen how the game was played. He picked up the compass from the shelf above the door, the same one his father had used to walk every boundary line, to mark every corner post. The brass was worn smooth from 2 generations of hands. The needle swung lazily, then settled, pointing north toward the creek. True north didn't change just because a man wanted it to. Footsteps outside. Caleb's hand went to the rifle by the door, but he recognized the gate before the knock came. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 2 more. Doc Pritchard's knock. Caleb opened the door. The old man stood there with his worn leather bag, white hair catching the morning light. He looked past Caleb to the bed, to the woman lying still beneath the quilt. "Ruth Brennan saw you carrying someone across the creek ford," Doc said quietly. "Figured you might need help." "She's hurt bad. Infected wound and—" Caleb hesitated. You should see for yourself. Doc stepped inside, setting his bag on the table with a soft thud. The smell of carbolic and camphor drifted from it, the smell of medicine and other people's pain. He moved to the bedside, hands already working to unwrap the bandage Caleb had applied. When he pulled back the cloth and saw the brand, his hands stopped moving. Caleb, Doc's voice had gone flat. This contract's got your property listed as collateral. He was holding a folded paper, pulled from Nora's torn pocket, stained with blood and desert dust. Caleb took the paper from Doc's hands. The ink had run in places where her blood had soaked through, but the words were clear enough. Mining camp indenture contract, 7-year term, labor to be provided in exchange for passage and board. At the bottom, 2 signatures, Nora's, shaky, probably forced, and beneath it, in that same ornate script he'd seen on territorial documents, Vernon Grissom, guarantor. Look at the collateral clause, Doc said, pointing to a line halfway down the page. Caleb read it twice before the words made sense. In the event of breach or escape, guarantor holds right to claim compensatory assets including but not limited to property, livestock, or land holdings associated with harboring party. She runs, and whoever helps her loses everything they own. Doc's jaw tightened. It's a trap, Caleb. Legal enough to hold up in territorial court, twisted enough to steal a man blind. When's this dated? April 20th. Caleb looked at the brand again. June 1878, 2 months after the contract. She was already bound when he burned her. Or she wasn't bound at all. Doc closed his bag with a sharp snap. Could be he's branding free women and calling them runaways. Either way, if they find her here. The sound of horses cut him off. 2 riders coming fast from the direction of town. Caleb moved to the window, rifle in hand. Vernon Grissom sat astride a bay gelding, his land office coat buttoned despite the heat. Beside him rode Sheriff Colton, badge catching the sun, hand resting easy on his gun belt. Stay with her, Caleb said. He stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. The smell of horse sweat and dust rolled toward him as the riders pulled up short of the porch. Grissom dismounted, brushing trail dust from his sleeves with careful fingers. Morning, Mercer? His voice carried the smooth tone of a man used to being obeyed. Sheriff and I are looking for a woman. Escaped indenture worker. Dangerous, likely armed. Ain't seen anyone? That so? Grissom smiled, the kind that never reached his eyes. Because Ruth Brennan says otherwise. Says she saw you carrying someone across the creek ford this morning. Sheriff Colton shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. He wouldn't meet Caleb's eyes. If I helped an injured woman, that's my business. Not when she's registered property of the San Pedro mining concern. Grissom pulled a folded document from his coat pocket, unfolded it with deliberate slowness. Territorial law is clear on this, Mercer. Harboring an indentured worker is theft. Sheriff's obligated to search your property and return her to lawful custody. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. She's hurt bad. Moving her now could kill her. Then she should have thought of that before she ran. Grissom's smile widened. Of course, there's another matter we need to discuss while we're here. He pulled a second paper from his coat. This one had a red territorial seal at the top. Foreclosure notice. Seems there's no record of your deed at the land office. Your father never filed the proper transfer documents when he claimed this land back in '69. Far as the territory is concerned, these 80 acres are still unclaimed public land. The words hit like a fist to the gut. That's a lie. My father paid the survey fees, worked the land for 15 years, without filing a deed. Grissom's voice stayed smooth as creek water over stone. I've been reviewing the records, Mercer. Lots of old claims from that era, settlers who didn't understand the filing requirements. The territory's looking to clear up these legal ambiguities. You've got 30 days to produce a registered deed, or this property goes to public auction. Sheriff Colton finally spoke, his voice low. Vernon, this ain't the time. The law doesn't wait for convenient timing, Sheriff. Grissom folded the foreclosure notice and held it out. Caleb didn't take it. After a moment, Grissom let it drop to the porch boards. 30 days, Mercer, and I'll be taking the woman now. No. The word came out flat, final. Grissom's smile disappeared. You're refusing a lawful order? I'm saying she's too hurt to move. Doc Pritchard's examining her now. When he says she's fit to travel, you can file whatever claim you want. Until then, she stays. You understand what you're risking? Grissom's voice dropped, losing its smooth edge. I'm trying to be reasonable here. You hand her over now, maybe I can overlook the harboring charge. Maybe I can give you extra time on that foreclosure. But if you fight me on this, then I fight you." Grissom stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Sheriff Colton. "You heard him refuse. That's obstruction of justice. I want it noted." The sheriff nodded slowly, still not meeting Caleb's eyes. Grissom mounted his horse, gathering the reins with sharp movements. "You've got 2 weeks, Mercer. 2 weeks before I come back with a federal marshal and a court order, and when I do, I'm taking the woman and the land." He turned the bay toward town, then paused. "You can fight for the woman or the land, Mercer, but the law says you ain't got time for both." They rode off, dust rising behind them like smoke from a dying fire. Caleb stood on the porch, holding the foreclosure notice, watching them disappear toward town. Behind him, the door opened. Doc stepped out, his face grave. "She heard everything," Doc said quietly. "And Caleb, there's something else. That brand? It's fresh, burned maybe 3-4 weeks ago, but the contract's dated 2 months back." Caleb looked down at the paper in his hands. 30 days to prove ownership. 2 weeks before Grissom returned with force. And a woman in his bed who'd been branded after her contract was signed, which meant either the contract was a lie or something worse was happening in that mining camp than anyone knew. "We're going to need help," Caleb said. Doc stepped back inside, his movements careful and measured. Caleb followed, pulling the door shut against the heat already building outside. Nora was awake now, propped against the rough pillow, her face pale, but her eyes sharp. "I heard what he said." Her voice was stronger than it had been. "About the land. I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Ain't your fault a man uses law like a weapon." Caleb set the foreclosure notice on the table, smoothing it flat with one hand. The red seal seemed to glow in the lamplight. "Doc, you said the brand's newer than the contract?" 3 weeks old at most. The tissue's still forming scar. If that contract's from April, someone's lying about when she was bound." Doc moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee from the pot that had been sitting since dawn. The bitter smell of overcooked grounds filled the cabin. "Question is whether we can prove it. And whether proving it matters." Nora's hands twisted in the quilt. "Grissom's got the territorial seal. He's got the sheriff. Who's going to believe a branded woman over the land office?" Caleb studied her face. The hollow cheeks, the fever-bright eyes, the way she held herself like someone used to expecting the worst. "How'd you end up in that mining camp?" "I didn't." She looked down at her hands. "I was working a laundry in Santa Fe. Had a room, honest work. Then one night, 3 men came. Said I owed money on a boarding house debt from 2 years back, a place I'd never even heard of. They had papers, a judge's signature. Before I knew what was happening, I was in a wagon heading south." "The mining camp?" "San Pedro. Worked the mess hall, cleaning mostly. Wasn't so bad at first." Her voice went flat. "Then Grissom started visiting. Once a month, sometimes more. He'd walk through, checking the workers. Last time he came, he pulled me aside, said I was being reassigned. Special contract. When I refused, he—" She touched her thigh, where the brand lay hidden beneath the bandage. "He said now I'd always know who owned me." The cabin went silent, except for the fire's crackle. Doc set his coffee down hard enough that the tin cup rang against the table. "That's not indenture," Doc said. "That's slavery with paperwork." "It's worse than that." Caleb picked up the contract again, reading more carefully now. "This collateral clause. How many other women has he done this to? How many are sitting in camps or brothels with brands and contracts that say someone else owns their skin? And how many properties has he stolen using the same trick?" Doc's eyes narrowed. "Man shows up to help a runaway. Grissom takes his land as compensation. On illegal theft, dress it up in territorial law." A knock at the door, soft, hesitant, 3 light taps. Caleb opened it to find Ruth Brennan standing in the morning glare, a cloth-covered basket in her hands. She was a solid woman, 50-some years old, with the kind of strength that came from working a blacksmith's bellows after her husband died. Gray streaked her dark hair, and her hands bore burn scars from the forge. "Brought bread," she said simply, "and I need to talk to you." Caleb stepped aside. Ruth came in, set the basket on the table, and nodded to Doc and Nora. The smell of fresh-baked bread mixed with the coffee and wood smoke. For a moment, the cabin felt almost normal, like Sunday mornings used to feel when Sarah was alive and neighbors still visited. Then Ruth spoke, and the moment broke. "Grissom's been at my smithy 3 times in the past month," she said. Wants to buy it, says the territory's planning to put a rail spur through, and my property's right in the path. Offers me half what it's worth. She looked at Caleb. I told him no. Yesterday he mentioned maybe the deed office would find some discrepancy in my filing. Maybe I'd have the same problem you're having. He's targeting anyone who won't sell. Doc leaned back against the wall, using the land office to steal property that won't come willing. There's more. Ruth pulled out a chair and sat, her movements deliberate. My Luther, God rest him, he kept books on every transaction, every nail sold, every horseshoe fitted, every survey chain he repaired. He was particular that way. His ledgers go back 20 years. She looked at Caleb. I remember your father. He came to Luther in '69, needed survey work done for his land claim, paid in horseshoes and 3 days' labor on our forge repairs. Caleb's breath caught. You have a record of that? I have Luther's ledger. Date, payment, description, all of it. Ruth's voice was quiet but firm. If your father paid for survey work, that's proof he intended to file proper claim. Might not be a registered deed, but it's something. It's more than something, Doc straightened. It's evidence of good faith claim. Under common law, that carries weight. If we can get it in front of a judge who'll listen. Caleb looked at the foreclosure notice again. Grissom's got 2 weeks to come back with a federal marshal. That's not much time. Ruth stood, brushing flour dust from her skirt. Then we'd best not waste it. I'll bring Luther's ledgers tonight, after dark. No sense letting Grissom know what we're planning. She moved toward the door, then paused. Caleb, there's something else. I've seen Grissom's survey crew on other properties. The Hendricks place, the old Mallory homestead, even the church lot. Always at night, always with their chains and compasses, like they're mapping something. Mapping what? That's what we need to find out. Ruth pulled the door open, sunlight flooding in. Because whatever Grissom's building, it's bigger than one man's ranch. She left, and the cabin settled back into shadow and silence. The days passed slow and hot. Doc came each morning to change Nora's bandages, checking for infection, mixing poultices from herbs he kept in glass jars that clinked softly in his bag. The wound was healing, angry red fading to pink, the swelling going down, but the brand stayed dark, raised, permanent. Caleb worked the ranch, riding fence lines and checking water levels, but his mind stayed on the foreclosure notice pinned to the cabin wall. 27 days left, then 25, then 23. He rode into town on the 4th day for supplies. The mercantile went quiet when he walked in. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Miss Henderson, who'd bought eggs from Sarah every Sunday for 10 years, turned away to study a bolt of calico like it held the secrets of heaven. Caleb gathered flour, coffee, salt, set coins on the counter. The clerk, young Miller boy, couldn't be more than 17, counted them twice, then slid them back. Mr. Henderson says we can't extend credit to folks with uncertain land standing. I'm paying cash. Still, the boy wouldn't meet his eyes. He says it's store policy. Caleb left the coins on the counter and walked out. Behind him, voices rose in speculation, fragments drifting through the open door. Harboring that woman, Grissom says, probably lose the whole ranch. He was tying his horse when Ruth appeared from the alley beside the smithy. She pressed a small sack into his hands, coffee and dried beans, the smell of burlap and her forge smoke clinging to it. Don't let them shame you, she said quietly. Half this town's too scared to breathe without Grissom's permission. The other half? Waiting to see which way the wind blows. She glanced toward the land office across the square. He's been busy, called a town meeting for tonight, says it's about territorial development, but everyone knows it's about you. Caleb looked at the building. 2 stories, brick, the territorial seal mounted above the door like a judge's gavel. Grissom's office window faced the square, and through it Caleb could see the man himself, sitting at a wide desk, papers spread before him. I'll be there, Caleb said. So will I. Ruth squeezed his arm once, then disappeared back into the smithy, hammer strikes ringing out seconds later, steady, defiant, the sound of work that wouldn't stop for fear. The meeting was called for 7. By 6:30 the town square was full. Chairs borrowed from the church lined up in rows before a wooden platform someone had built that afternoon. Fresh pine, the smell of sawdust still heavy in the evening air. Lanterns hung from posts, casting yellow light that made shadows dance. Caleb stood at the back, beside Doc. Nora had wanted to come, but Doc had forbidden it. Too soon, too risky. So she waited at the ranch, and Caleb tried not to think about how exposed she was, alone in that cabin with nothing but a locked door between her and whatever Grissom might send. The crowd murmured, ranchers and shopkeepers, farmers and their wives, even Preacher Daniels in his worn black coat. Some nodded to Caleb, most looked away. At 7 sharp, Grissom stepped onto the platform. Sheriff Colton stood behind him, hand resting on his gun belt the way it always did when he was uncomfortable. An easel had been set up, covered with a canvas cloth. "Evening, folks." Grissom's voice carried across the square, smooth and certain. "I know you're all busy people, so I'll get to the point. The territory's growing, rails are coming, and with them opportunity. But growth requires clear property lines, legal certainty." He paused, letting the words settle. That's why the Land Office has been conducting a comprehensive review of all territorial claims filed before 1870. A murmur ran through the crowd. Grissom raised a hand for silence. "Now, I know this causes concern for some folks, but understand, we're not trying to take anyone's land. We're trying to protect it, to make sure every acre has proper documentation, proper legal standing." His eyes found Caleb in the back. "Because without that documentation, a man's got nothing but dust and hope." He pulled the canvas off the easel. Beneath it, a map. Large, detailed, hand-drawn with careful precision. The territory spread out in brown ink, with properties marked in red, 12 of them. Caleb recognized his ranch immediately. The creek marked, the boundaries drawn with surveyor's accuracy. Red lines connected all 12 properties. Every one bordered water access or sat along the proposed rail corridor. "These are the properties under review," Grissom continued. "Each one filed before 1870, each one missing critical documentation. The territory's given notice to the current occupants, 30 days to produce registered deeds or face auction." He pointed to Caleb's land. "Some of these folks are cooperating, working with my office to resolve their filing issues. Others," he let the word hang, "others are choosing to be difficult." "That's 12 families," someone called from the crowd, Tom Hendricks, whose property sat just north of Caleb's. "You saying we might all lose our land?" "I'm saying the law is clear. No deed, no game." Grissom's voice sharpened. "And when folks start harboring fugitives, interfering with lawful indenture contracts, well, that just makes the situation more complicated." All eyes turned to Caleb. "Caleb Mercer is currently in violation of territorial law," Grissom said, his words deliberate. "He's harboring an escaped indenture worker, a woman with a legal contract, signed and witnessed, requiring 7 years of labor to the San Pedro mining concern. By refusing to surrender her, he's committed theft. And under territorial statute, that theft allows the injured party, in this case the mining concern, which I represent as guarantor, to seek compensation." He smiled. "Which is why, even if Mr. Mercer manages to produce a deed, I'll be filing a claim against his property for damages." The crowd erupted. Voices overlapped, outrage and fear mixing into a wall of sound. Caleb felt Doc's hand on his arm, steadying. "You're saying no matter what he does, you take his land?" Ruth's voice cut through the noise. She stood near the front, forge-scarred hands on her hips. "I'm saying the law has consequences, Mrs. Brennan. Mr. Mercer made his choice when he took that woman in. Now he gets to live with it." "And the rest of us?" Tom Hendricks again, standing now. "What about our properties?" "Like I said, cooperate and we'll work something out." "Fight me." Grissom gestured to the map. "Well, you can see how much land's at stake here. The territory needs clear titles, needs to know who owns what. Can't have every settler with a handshake and a prayer thinking that's the same as legal documentation." Caleb stared at the map. 12 properties, 12 families, all marked in red like targets, and every single one, he saw it now, bordered water or rail access, the two things that made land worth stealing. "You've been mapping our properties." The words came out before Caleb could stop them. "Surveying at night, marking boundaries, Omoe." Grissom's smile widened. "Survey work is part of the review process, Mr. Mercer. How else would we know what's being claimed?" "You're stealing land." Caleb stepped forward and the crowd parted. "This isn't about missing deeds. This is about taking property you want and dressing it up in legal paper." "That's a serious accusation." Grissom's voice went cold. "Sheriff, you hearing this?" Colton shifted his weight. "I hear it." Slander against a territorial official. I could have you arrested right now, Mercer. Then do it. Caleb climbed onto the platform, facing Grissom across 3 feet of fresh-cut pine. The smell of sawdust and lamp oil surrounded them. Arrest me. Drag me in front of a judge. Let's see what a court says about your indenture contracts and your convenient foreclosures. For a moment, Grissom's mask slipped. Caleb saw fury there, and something else. Fear, maybe, or calculation. Then the smile returned. You've got 13 days left, Mercer. 13 days to produce a deed I know doesn't exist. And when you can't, he tapped the map. Well, at least the auction will be entertaining. He stepped down from the platform and walked toward the land office, Sheriff Colton trailing behind. The crowd stood frozen, uncertain, some watching Caleb, some watching Grissom's back, all of them caught between a law they didn't trust and a future they couldn't see. When Caleb turned around, he found Ruth waiting at the platform's edge. 13 days, she said quietly. We'd better make them count. The night air felt heavy as Caleb and Doc walked back to the ranch, boots scuffing against hard-packed earth. Neither spoke until the lights of town had faded behind them and only starlight remained. He's got it all planned out, Doc finally said, as real. Every move mapped like one of his surveys. He made a mistake tonight. Caleb's voice was quiet but certain. Showing that map, now we know it's not just me, it's systematic. Knowing and proving are different things. Doc shifted his medical bag to his other hand. You saw how that crowd looked at you. Half of them are already planning how to stay in Grissom's good graces. And the other half? Scared, waiting. Doc paused at the fork where his road split off toward town. But Ruth's not waiting, and neither am I. We'll find something in those ledgers. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Caleb to walk the last mile alone. The cabin was dark when he arrived. For one heart-stopping moment, he thought Nora had gone, run again, disappeared into the desert rather than bring more trouble. Then he saw lamplight flicker to life inside, saw her shadow move across the window. She was sitting at the table when he entered, wrapped in Sarah's old shawl, a tin cup of water in her hands. The lamp cast soft light across her face, and for the first time since he'd found her, she didn't look like someone running. She looked like someone deciding whether to stay. I heard horses earlier, she said. Thought maybe they'd come for me. Just Doc, heading back to town. Caleb hung his hat on the peg by the door, moved to the stove. The coffee pot was still warm. He poured himself a cup, the bitter smell familiar and grounding. Town meeting was educational. Bad? Worse. A boy. He told her about on the map, about Grissom's 12 marked properties, about the way the crowd had looked at him, some with pity, most with the careful distance people keep from a man already drowning. Nora listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set her cup down with a soft clink against the wooden table. I should go, she said. Tonight, before he comes back with his marshal. If I'm not here, maybe he'll leave your land alone. He won't. That map proved it. This isn't about you. You're just the excuse he's using. Caleb sat across from her, studying her face in the lamplight. He'll take the land whether you're here or not. Difference is, if you run, he wins twice. And if I stay, you lose everything your father built. Maybe. He reached across the table, let his hand rest near hers without touching. Or maybe we fight. Find a way to prove what he's doing. With what? You don't have a deed. I don't have anything but a brand and a contract that says I'm property. Her voice cracked. I'm not worth losing this for. That's not your call to make. She looked up at him, eyes shining with tears she wouldn't let fall. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Caleb thought about Sarah, about the child that never drew breath, about 4 years of silence in a cabin built for a family, about the way his father used to say a man's worth was measured by what he stood for when standing cost him everything. Because some things you don't walk away from, he said finally. And because out here, if we don't stand for each other, there's nothing worth standing on. She did cry then, quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks while she pressed her hand over her mouth to hold back the sound. Caleb let her, understanding that some grief needed witness, but not words. After a while, she wiped her face with the corner of the shawl. What did Doc mean about ledgers? Ruth Brennan, the blacksmith's widow, she's got her husband's account books. Going back 20 years, If my father paid for survey work, it'll be recorded there. He sipped his coffee, now cold. Might not be a registered deed, but it's proof of claim, proof he meant to file proper. Will that be enough? I don't know. He stood, moved to the window. Outside, the prairie stretched dark and endless under stars that had watched this land long before any man thought to claim it. But it's more than we had yesterday. Behind him, he heard Nora stand, heard her cross the rough plank floor. She stopped beside him at the window, looking out at the same darkness. The brand, she said quietly. Doc said it's newer than the contract. That means Grissom burned me after the contract expired, after I was already free. Caleb turned to look at her. You sure about the dates? The contract said 7 weeks of work. I counted every day. Her hand moved to her thigh, where the brand lay hidden beneath her skirt. I told him I was done, that I'd worked my time. He laughed, said the contract was renewable at his discretion. When I refused, she touched the brand mark through the fabric. He said now I'd always know who owned me, but he was wrong. Wrong how? Nobody owns what they didn't respect first. She met Caleb's eyes. And pain doesn't make a person property. It just proves they survived. Outside, an owl called, low and mournful. The sound drifted across the prairie, unanswered. Get some rest, Caleb said. Ruth's bringing those ledgers tomorrow night. If we're going to fight this, we'll need to be sharp. Nora nodded and moved toward the bed. Caleb took his blanket and settled by the stove, rifle within reach, watching the door until exhaustion pulled him under. In his dreams, he surveyed boundaries that kept shifting, tried to mark corners that wouldn't stay fixed, and woke just before dawn to find Nora standing at the window, backlit by the first gray light, looking like someone who'd decided to stop running and start fighting back. Sheriff Colton came alone at dusk 3 days later, riding slow like a man carrying bad news. Caleb met him at the fence line, rifle across his saddle, though both of them knew he wouldn't use it. Caleb. The sheriff nodded, hat brim low against the setting sun. Sheriff? They sat on horseback for a moment, two men who'd once shared coffee and conversation before the world got complicated. The smell of evening sage drifted on the wind, mixing with horse sweat and the dust they'd both kicked up getting here. I'm supposed to serve you notice, Colton said finally. Grissom's filed papers with the territorial court. Got himself a federal marshal coming in 6 days. They'll raid the property, take the woman, and hold you for obstruction pending trial. 6 days. Caleb kept his voice level. That's faster than the foreclosure timeline. He's pushing it through. Got friends in Santa Fe. Colton shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. Caleb, I don't like this any more than you do, but I've got a badge and a family to feed. When that marshal comes, I have to support the action. I know. Do you? Colton finally looked at him directly. Because when it happens, it won't be gentle. Federal marshals don't negotiate. They execute orders. And if you resist, I won't. The sheriff studied him for a long moment. Then what are you planning? To prove he's a liar and a thief before those 6 days run out. Colton almost smiled. With what? You ever wonder why Grissom owes money in Santa Fe? Why a land office clerk needs to run side schemes with mining camps and indenture contracts? Not my business to wonder. Maybe it should be. Maybe it should. Caleb leaned forward in his saddle. He owes gambling debts. Big ones. That's why he's stealing land. Needs the money to cover what he lost at cards. And every property he takes, he's mapping first with survey equipment he never paid for. The sheriff's jaw tightened. You can prove that? Working on it. Colton was quiet for a long moment, his horse shifting beneath him, bit jangling softly. He came by the office yesterday, wanted to know who I'd side with when the marshal arrives. Him or you. What did you tell him? That I'd uphold the law, Colton gathered his reins. But I didn't say which law, or whose version of it. He turned his horse toward town, then paused. 6 days, Caleb. After that, I can't protect you, can't even look the other way. He rode off into the gathering darkness, and Caleb sat watching until the dust settled and the prairie went still. Ruth came after midnight, when the moon was just a sliver and the town was asleep. She rode in a small cart pulled by her old mule, 3 leather-bound ledgers wrapped in oilcloth on the seat beside her. Doc was already at the cabin, having arrived an hour earlier with fresh bandages and news from town. The 3 of them sat around the table, while Nora kept watch at the window, and Ruth opened the first ledger. The smell of old leather and ink filled the room. The pages were yellow with age, but Luther Brennan's handwriting was precise and clear. Every transaction recorded, every payment noted, every debt tracked with the careful attention of a man who understood that memory fades but paper endures. Here, Ruth's finger traced down a page dated September 1869. Caleb Mercer Sr., survey work, 80 acres, Creek Junction to Ridgeline. Payment, 40 horseshoes, fitted and filed, plus 3 days' labor on forge repairs. Caleb stared at his father's name, written in another man's careful hand. Proof. Not a deed, but proof of intent. Proof of payment. Proof that his father had done everything a man was supposed to do to claim land honestly. There's more. Ruth flipped through pages, found another entry. November 1869, Caleb Mercer Sr., additional survey work, boundary markers placed, payment 2 wagon wheel repairs and 1 harrow blade sharpened. He was marking corners, Doc said, establishing boundaries. That's what you do when you're claiming land proper. And here, Ruth's voice went hard. Vernon Grissom, March 1872, survey equipment rental, chain, compass, measuring rods, promise payment $15, balance due $15. She flipped forward. April 1872, Grissom again, equipment rental, balance due $15. Another page. May, June, July, every month renting equipment, never paying. Doc leaned closer. How much does he owe total? Ruth ran her finger down the columns, adding in her head, $340. For equipment he's been using to survey other people's land so he can steal it. That's leverage, Caleb said quietly. Public debt to a dead man's estate. Makes him look like a thief before we even get to the land fraud. There's something else. Ruth turned to a page near the back of the second ledger. Luther kept notes on jobs, not just transactions, but observations. Look at this, dated January 1878, 6 months ago. She read aloud. V. Grissom, surveying Hendrick's property after dark. Asked about it, said land office business, didn't pay for equipment rental. Starting to wonder if he ever intends to. After dark, Doc repeated. Why survey after dark unless you don't want people knowing what you're measuring? Because he's not surveying for the territory. Caleb stood, began pacing the small cabin. He's surveying for himself, finding the valuable parcels, water access, rail corridors, then using the land office to declare them improperly filed so he can force them to auction. And who bids at those auctions? Nora's voice came from the window, quiet but certain. He does, or his partners do. Either way, he controls the sale. Ruth closed the ledger with a soft thump. Luther wrote one more note, last entry before he died. She read it slowly. Asked Preacher Daniels about Grissom's character. Preacher changed subject. Makes me wonder what the land office has on the church property. The cabin went silent. Outside, a coyote called in the distance, long and lonely. The church, Doc said slowly. Preacher Daniels wouldn't speak against Grissom at the town meeting. Wouldn't even look at you, Caleb. What if Grissom's threatening the church deed too? Then we've got less time than I thought. Caleb moved to the window beside Nora, looking out at the darkness. Because if he's got the preacher scared, he's got half the town's conscience locked down. Ruth began wrapping the ledgers back in oilcloth. I'm taking these to my sister's place in Las Cruces tomorrow. Somewhere Grissom can't reach them if this goes bad. No. Caleb turned from the window. We need them here, for evidence. Not if he burns this place down first. Ruth's voice was firm. I'll make copies tonight. You keep those. I'll hide the originals. She stood, gathering the ledgers. 5 days left, Caleb. We'd better have a plan. The copies arrived before dawn, delivered by Ruth's nephew, a quiet boy of 15 who handed Caleb a canvas-wrapped bundle and left without speaking. Inside, 3 ledgers reproduced in Ruth's careful hand, every entry copied exact, every date and amount preserved. Caleb spread them across the table, weighing the evidence with tired eyes. His father's payments, Grissom's debts, Luther's notes about after-dark surveys. It was enough to raise questions, maybe enough to cast doubt, but was it enough to stop a federal marshal with signed court orders? Doc arrived an hour later, his face drawn. He poured coffee without asking, the tin pot scraping against the stovetop. The smell of burnt grounds filled the cabin, bitter, almost medicinal. Grissom's been busy, Doc said. Visited Tom Hendricks yesterday. Offered to resolve his deed problem for a 50% property sale. Tom's thinking about it. 50%? Caleb's voice was flat. So Tom keeps half his land and Grissom gets the creek access for nothing. Fear makes men negotiate against themselves. Doc sat heavily. Sarah Mitchell, too, the widow with the 40 acres south of town. Grissom offered her cash, enough to relocate, start over somewhere else. She's packing. Nora stood at the window, watching the sun climb. She'd been quiet since Ruth left, her shoulders tense beneath the borrowed dress. Now she turned, and Caleb saw something in her face that hadn't been there before, a kind of desperate clarity. "You could settle too," she said. "Sign over the land, take whatever cash he offers. We could go somewhere he doesn't have power. Colorado, California even." Caleb stared at her. "You want me to run?" "I want you to survive." Her voice cracked. "This isn't your fight, Caleb. It's mine. I'm the one who ran. I'm the one with the brand. You're just... Just what? A man who happened to find you?" He stood, crossed to where she stood in the morning light. "That's not how this works, Nora. Out here, you don't get to decide what's worth fighting for based on whose name is on the deed. You decide based on what's right. Right doesn't feed you when your land's gone. Right doesn't keep you warm when you're sleeping in the desert." She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. "I've seen what happens to people who fight men like Grissom. They lose every time, and they lose everything." Doc set his cup down with a sharp clink. "Not every time. Enough times." Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "At the camp, there was a woman who tried to fight her contract. Said she'd paid her time, same as me. They broke her arm, made her work with it broken, said it would heal crooked as a reminder." The cabin went silent except for the fire's crackle and the wind pressing against the walls. Caleb felt the weight of it, the calculation she was making, the price she was tallying. How much suffering was one man's land worth? How much blood could you justify for 80 acres of grass and hope? He looked at the compass on the shelf above the door. His father's compass, the needle always pointing true north no matter how the world spun around it. The brass was worn smooth where 2 generations of hands had held it, had checked direction against feeling, had chosen truth over convenience. "You're right," Caleb said quietly. "Fighting men like Grissom, most times you lose. Most times they've got the money and the law and the fear all working for them. Most times, decent people look away because it's easier than standing up." He took the compass down, held it in his palm. The needle swung, settled, pointed north toward the creek. "But if we don't stand now, who does? If we let him take this land, these 12 families, where does it stop?" He looked at Nora. "You think running to Colorado makes you free? He'll still be here, still burning brands into women who refuse him, still stealing land from folks who don't have lawyers. And you'll wake up every morning knowing you could have stopped him and didn't." "We can't stop him." Her voice broke. "We're 3 people with some old ledgers and a story nobody will believe." "4 people," Doc said. "Ruth's not backing down." "4 then, against a federal marshal and the entire territorial land office." Nora laughed, bitter and sharp. "Those are good odds." Caleb moved to the table, picked up one of the copied ledgers. His father's name stared back at him, proof of payment, proof of intent, proof that a man had worked and saved and built something meant to last. "My father didn't have much, couldn't read more than his own name, but he knew the difference between taking and earning, and he knew that land you don't fight for isn't worth holding." He set the ledger down, looked at Nora and Doc both. "I could sign it over, take Grissom's money, start somewhere new, keep my head down, stay safe." The words tasted like ash. "But every sunrise after, I'd know I traded my father's work for comfort, traded your freedom for my convenience, and that's not a trade I can live with." "Even if it cost you everything?" Nora's eyes were wet. "Everything's already gone if I walk away." The compass needle held steady. True north didn't change just because a man wanted it to. Caleb had learned that from his father, learned it from this land, learned it from 4 years of silence after Sarah died, and the only thing that kept him standing was the knowledge that some things, some promises, you don't abandon just because they hurt. Doc stood, moving to the window. Outside, the prairie stretched golden in the morning light, the creek running silver through land that had been here long before any of them, and would be here long after. 5 days, he said. We'd better make them count. 4 days, Caleb corrected. Today's already started. Nora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then straightened her shoulders. What do we do first? We build a platform, Caleb said. Town square. Big enough for a crowd to watch what happens when you drag truth into daylight. The platform went up on the third day, built by Caleb and Doc with lumber from Ruth's yard. They worked in full view of the land office, hammer strikes ringing across the square like a challenge. By noon, a crowd had gathered, not helping, just watching, waiting to see if Defiance had a future or just a funeral. Grissom appeared on the land office steps around 2, arms crossed, that smooth smile playing at his lips. He watched them work for a full 5 minutes before calling out, "Building your own auction block, Mercer? Thoughtful, saves the territory the expense." Caleb didn't answer, just drove another nail home, the sound sharp and final. By evening, the platform stood solid, 6 feet high, 10 feet square, with steps on one side and a clear view from every corner of the square. Ruth brought lanterns as the sun set, hanging them from posts they'd sunk into the hard earth. The light turned the raw pine golden, made the whole structure look like something between a stage and a gallows. "Tomorrow," Caleb said, stepping back to survey the work. "Noon, we make our stand." Doc nodded, wiping sawdust from his hands. "You sure Grissom will show?" "He won't be able to resist." Caleb looked across the square to where light still burned in the land office window. "Man like that needs to see his victories in public." Morning came cool and clear. Caleb woke before dawn, checked on Nora, still sleeping, her breathing even and strong, and saddled his horse. The ride into town took 20 minutes, long enough for doubt to whisper its poison. What if nobody comes? What if they come but won't listen? What if the ledgers aren't enough? But when he reached the square, Ruth was already there, setting up a small table beside the platform. Doc arrived minutes later, his medical bag in one hand and the copied ledgers in the other, and behind them, slowly, others began to appear. Tom Hendricks, hat in hand, looking older than his 50 years, the Henderson family from the Mercantile, Sarah Mitchell, the widow who'd been packing to leave, standing with her 2 grown sons, even Preacher Daniels, his worn Bible tucked under his arm, his face troubled but present. By 11, the square held maybe 60 people, not the whole town, but enough to be witnesses. Sheriff Colton arrived at 11:30, taking a position at the edge of the crowd. His hand rested on his gun belt, but his eyes, when they met Caleb's, held something that might have been respect, or maybe just resignation. At noon exactly, Vernon Grissom stepped out of the land office. He was flanked by 2 men Caleb didn't recognize, well-dressed, hard-eyed, the kind who got paid to make problems disappear. Behind them came a third man wearing a federal marshal's badge, his coat open to show the pistol at his hip. The crowd parted. Grissom climbed the platform steps like a man ascending a throne, his movements confident and controlled. The marshal followed, then the 2 hired men. They stood in a line, backlit by noon sun, and Grissom's smile was the smile of a man who'd already won. "Appreciate you building this, Mercer," Grissom's voice carried across the suddenly silent square. "Makes the proceedings more official." He pulled a document from his coat. "I have here a federal warrant for the arrest of one Nora, last name unknown, for violation of indenture contract and theft of property from the San Pedro mining concern. Marshal Dryden will be executing that warrant immediately after this meeting." The marshal nodded, his face expressionless. "I also have," Grissom continued, unfolding a second paper, "a territorial foreclosure order for the property currently occupied by Caleb Mercer. 80 acres, Creek Junction to Ridgeline. Auction will proceed in 3 days, or sooner if the occupant can be removed today." "That's 2 pieces of paper," Caleb said, climbing the platform steps. "I've got 3. Grissom's smile flickered. Caleb reached the platform, stood facing Grissom across 6 feet of raw pine, the smell of fresh-cut wood mixed with dust and nervous sweat from the crowd below. First piece, he pulled out the copied ledger, opened it to his father's entry. "Proof my father paid survey fees in 1869. 40 horseshoes, 3 days' labor, all recorded in Luther Brennan's books. That's legal consideration. That's proof of claim under common law." "Common law doesn't trump territorial filing requirements," Grissom said smoothly. "Nice try, but..." Second piece. Caleb flipped to another page. "Record of your unpaid debts to Luther Brennan's estate. $340 for survey equipment rental. Equipment you used to map other people's property so you could steal it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Grissom's jaw tightened. "Business disputes have nothing to do with..." Third piece, Caleb's voice cut across him. "Luther's notes. Dated observations of you surveying properties after dark. The Hendricks place. Sarah Mitchell's 40 acres. Even the church lot. He looked at Preacher Daniels. That's why you wouldn't speak up, isn't it? He's got something on the church deed, too. The preacher's face went pale. He nodded once, slowly. The crowd erupted, voices overlapping, anger rising like heat off stone. Grissom raised his hands for silence, but nobody was listening anymore. These are copies, Grissom shouted. Anyone can forge copies. Where are the originals? Safe, Ruth's voice rang out from beside the platform. And recorded with a notary in Las Cruces. You want to see them? We can arrange a trip. Might take a few days, though. Maybe longer than your foreclosure timeline. Grissom's composure cracked. Marshal, arrest these people for obstruction. Wait. Doc Pritchard climbed the steps, his medical bag in hand. The crowd quieted. Before you arrest anyone, I've got evidence that needs witnessing. He set his bag on the platform, pulled out a leather journal. Medical examination notes. Patient, Nora, examined on... He read the date. Brand mark analysis shows tissue formation consistent with 3 to 4 weeks healing, but the indenture contract you're enforcing, dated 2 months prior. He let that sink in. Which means either your contract is backdated, or you branded a free woman and called it legal marking. Doc's voice was steel wrapped in surgical precision. Either way, it's not indenture, it's torture, and I'll testify to that in any court that asks. The marshal stepped forward, his hand moving away from his gun. Let me see that contract. Grissom hesitated, then pulled it from his coat. The marshal took it, studied it closely, then looked at Doc's journal. His face was stone, but something shifted behind his eyes. The seal's wrong, the marshal said quietly. This isn't a territorial mining contract. This is a private indenture agreement. I don't have jurisdiction to enforce it. What? Grissom's voice rose. You have your orders. I have orders to recover a territorial indenture worker. This document doesn't qualify. The marshal handed the contract back. You want her returned, file a civil suit. But I'm not arresting anyone on paperwork that doesn't match my warrant. Grissom stared at him, face reddening. I'll have your badge for this. You're welcome to try. The marshal descended the platform steps, moving through the crowd toward his horse. The 2 hired men looked at each other, then followed. In 30 seconds, Grissom stood alone on the platform, surrounded by 60 witnesses and 3 people who'd just dismantled his carefully constructed theft. Sheriff Colton climbed the steps slowly. He took the foreclosure order from Grissom's hand, studied it, then looked at the ledger Caleb held. I'm thinking, Colton said carefully, that the territorial court might want to review these claims before any auction proceeds, especially given the questions about the land office's record-keeping practices. He looked at Grissom. I'm also thinking you and I need to have a conversation about those survey equipment debts, and about who authorized you to survey private property without owner consent. Grissom's voice shook. You can't, I have authority. Had authority. Ruth's voice was cold. Past tense, because I just sent a telegram to the territorial governor's office. Seems he's interested in knowing why his land office clerk owes $340 to a dead man's estate and has been conducting unauthorized surveys. Grissom looked around the platform, at Caleb, at Doc, at Ruth standing below with her arms crossed, at Sheriff Colton, whose hand now rested not on his gun, but on a pair of iron shackles at his belt, at the crowd, whose fear had transformed into something harder and sharper. You'll regret this, Grissom said, voice dropping to a hiss. All of you. I have connections. You have debts, Caleb said quietly, and lies, and a platform full of witnesses who just watched you try to steal land and freedom using forged paper and fear. He pulled his father's brass compass from his pocket, set it on the platform between them. The needle swung, settled, pointed true north toward the creek and the land beyond. Some things don't change just because you want them to, Caleb said. Truth's one, justice is another, and a man's right to stand on ground he earned honest, that's the third. Sheriff Colton's hand closed around Grissom's arm, not rough, but firm, the kind of grip that said running would only make things harder. Vernon Grissom, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and falsification of territorial documents. Colton's voice carried across the square, formal and final. You have the right to appeal to the territorial court, but until then, you're coming with me. Grissom jerked his arm back. On whose authority? You can't... This is political persecution. On the authority of 60 witnesses who just watched you try to steal land using fake contracts. Colton's patience was wearing thin. Now you can walk to the jail peaceful, or I can drag you. Your choice. For a moment, Grissom looked like he might fight. His face was red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Then something in him collapsed. Not his body, but whatever had been holding him upright. The smooth confidence, the calculated smile, all of it drained away until he was just a middle-aged man in an expensive coat who'd gambled too much and lost everything. "My satchel," he said quietly. "In my office. It has documents, personal effects. We'll inventory everything." Colton nodded to a deputy who'd appeared at the platform's edge. "Mr. Henderson, you witnessed that request?" The mercantile owner nodded. "I did." "Good. Let's go, Vernon." They descended the steps together, the crowd parting in silence. Caleb watched them cross the square, Grissom walking like a man in a dream, Colton steady beside him. When they disappeared into the jail, a collective exhale seemed to move through the gathered townspeople. Then someone started clapping. It was Tom Hendricks, his weathered hands coming together in so deliberate rhythm. Sarah Mitchell joined him, then Ruth, then others, until the sound filled the square, not celebration exactly, but acknowledgement. Witness, becoming voice. Doc climbed down from the platform, his medical bag swinging at his side. "That satchel Grissom mentioned, I'd wager it's full of blank deeds. Pre-signed, ready to fill in whatever names suited his purpose. Sheriff will find out soon enough." Caleb picked up his father's compass, felt the familiar weight of it. "Right now, I need to get back to the ranch. Nora shouldn't be alone when she hears." Ruth appeared beside him, her face tired but satisfied. "I'll ride with you. Got something that belongs to her." The ranch was quiet when they arrived, the cabin door standing open to let in the afternoon breeze. Nora sat on the porch steps, Sarah's shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her face turned toward the sound of approaching horses. She stood as they dismounted, her hand pressed to her chest like she was holding her heart in place. "What happened?" "It's done." Caleb's voice was rough with exhaustion. "Grissom's in jail. The marshal wouldn't enforce the indenture contract. Your brand, Doc testified it was torture, not legal marking." Nora swayed. Ruth caught her elbow, steadied her. "Easy now. You're safe. Truly safe. And the land?" Nora's eyes found Caleb's. "Your father's ranch?" "Still mine. For now, anyway. Sheriff's delaying the foreclosure pending a territorial investigation." He climbed the porch steps, sat heavily on the sun-warmed wood. "We've got time to file proper claim. Ruth's helping me navigate the paperwork." "More than that." Ruth pulled a folded document from her coat pocket, the paper crisp and official looking. "This is a deed, 10 acres creek access, split from Caleb's property, legal, filed, and recorded as of this morning in Las Cruces." She held it out to Nora. Nora stared at it like it might disappear. "I don't understand." "Caleb filed it yesterday. Put your name on it." Ruth pressed the deed into Nora's hands. "It's yours, free and clear. Nobody can take it, burn it, or claim it. You're a landowner, Nora, a citizen with property rights." The paper trembled in Nora's grip. She looked at Caleb, eyes bright with tears. "You gave me land?" "I gave you a choice." Caleb's voice was gentle. "You can stay here, build a life on ground that's legally yours, or you can sell it, take the money, go anywhere you want, but whatever you choose, it's your choice. Not Grissom's, not mine, yours." Nora sank down on the steps beside him, the deed clutched to her chest. She cried, deep shaking sobs that seemed to come from some place she'd locked away for years. Ruth sat on her other side, one arm around her shoulders, letting her break apart and remake herself in the afternoon sun. When the tears finally slowed, Nora wiped her face with the shawl's edge. "I want to stay," she whispered. "If you'll have me, not as... I want my own cabin, my own work, but close enough that..." She stopped, searching for words. "Close enough that we're neighbors. Partners, maybe. If that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Caleb pulled the brass compass from his pocket, held it out to her. "Help me survey the boundary line. I want to know where I end, and you begin." She took the compass, her fingers brushing his. The needle swung lazy, then settled, pointing true north toward the creek and the land beyond. "Tomorrow," she said. "Today, I just want to sit here and remember what it feels like to own something that can't be taken away." So they sat, 3 people on a porch built by hands that were gone now, watching the sun track west across land that had been fought for and won not with bullets but with ledgers and witness, and the stubborn insistence that some things were worth standing for even when standing cost everything. Ruth left before sunset, promising to return the next day with surveying equipment and the legal papers Caleb would need to finalize his own claim. Doc stopped by near dusk, checking Nora's wound one last time, pronouncing her healed enough to begin the work of building a life. When full dark came, Caleb and Nora remained on the porch, the stars emerging one by one overhead. The prairie sounds rose around them, crickets and nightbirds, the distant call of coyotes, the whisper of wind through grass that had weathered drought and flood in the endless turning of seasons. "What happens now?" Nora asked. Caleb thought about his father, about Sarah, about all the people who'd built and lost and built again on this hard land. "Now we plant fence posts, build a cabin, dig a well on your 10 acres, and in the spring when the grass comes back we see what grows." She nodded, settling deeper into the shawl. "That sounds good. That sounds like home." 3 months passed before the first frost came. By then, Nora's cabin stood finished, small but solid, with a stone chimney Caleb had helped raise and windows that caught the morning light. Her 10 acres stretched from the creek to the ridgeline, marked by fence posts they'd set together, the compass guiding every measurement. The territorial governor's investigation uncovered 14 forged deeds and 23 fraudulent indenture contracts. Grissom went to prison in Santa Fe. The families he'd threatened got their land back, their claims validated by common law, and the ledgers Ruth had preserved. Caleb's deed was filed proper now, registered and sealed, but some mornings he still took out his father's compass just to watch the needle settle true. Winter evenings, after the work was done, they'd meet on the fence line between their properties, his 80 acres and her 10, and watch the sky turn colors that had no names. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just stood in the comfortable silence of people who'd survived something together and come out stronger for it. Nora never covered the brand. The scar stayed visible when she rolled up her sleeves to work, when she washed clothes in the creek, when she rode into town for supplies. At first people stared, then they stopped staring. The mark became just part of her story, proof she'd survived, not proof someone had owned her. Come spring, she planted a garden where she'd first collapsed, near the brass survey marker that had witnessed everything, wildflowers mostly, and some vegetables, things that grew stubborn in hard ground. Caleb watched from his porch one April morning as she worked the soil, her hands confident and sure. The compass sat on the rail beside him, its needle pointing north like it always had, like it always would. Some things don't change. Truth, justice, the way good land holds a person who's willing to fight for it. And some things do change, grow, heal, become something stronger at the broken places. The creek ran silver between their properties, same water feeding both grounds. That was the thing about boundaries, Caleb thought. They didn't divide so much as define. And what they defined out here was simple. Where you stood, what you stood for, and who stood with you when the dust finally settled. Nora looked up, caught him watching, and waved. He waved back. The compass needle held steady, pointing home.